The tow truck driver smirked as he hooked my truck onto his rig. Sorry, buddy. HOA rules. He had no idea he was working for me. I watched in silence as my own company's tow truck lifted my vehicle off the ground. The driver, unaware of my identity, secured the straps while a familiar, smug voice echoed behind him. Violation of HOA Code 5.2, no overnight street parking. Rick Harrison, HOA president and self-proclaimed dictator of Westwood Estates, grinned like he had just won the lottery. You can pick it up from impound, he added with a smirk, handing me a pink slip. A $500 towing fee and a $250 HOA fine for parking in my own driveway. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral. Rick had no idea that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Rick and his HOA enforcers strutted away, laughing amongst themselves, convinced they had put me in my place. What they didn't realize was that they had just handed me the perfect opportunity to unravel their entire operation. I pulled out my phone and made a single call. Jimmy, one of our rigs just towed a truck from Westwood Estates. I paused. Yeah, my truck. Silence. Then Jimmy laughed. Oh man, this is going to be fun. You have no idea, I muttered, watching my own tow truck disappear down the street. Rick and his HOA cronies had no clue what was coming. The next morning, I took a little trip to the impound lot. My truck was parked right at the front. A neon yellow hold until fees paid sign slapped onto the windshield. The clerk barely looked up when I approached. Impound fees are $500, plus storage. I slid my driver's license across the counter. I'm here to pick up my truck. The moment she read my name, her face paled. My name. The same name that signed her paychecks. Oh, sir. I didn't realize. I raised a hand. Relax. I just want my truck back. She scrambled to print the release forms, hands shaking. Do you need me to call the yard manager? No need. I signed the paperwork, walked out, and climbed into my truck without paying a dime. And Rick had no idea. That night, I met with Jimmy at a diner just outside of town. He slid a thick folder across the table. Here's everything we found. I flipped through shady financial records, fraudulent towing contracts, and a web of corruption spanning years. They've been running this racket forever, Jimmy said. Rick funnels all the HOA's towing business to Harrison Recovery Services, which overcharges residents and kicks back a percentage of the profits to the HOA board. I clenched my jaw. And the residents had no clue. They think it's just HOA policy, Jimmy added. But technically, the HOA isn't allowed to profit from third-party towing companies. A slow grin spread across my face. So they've been illegally pocketing cash under the table. Jimmy nodded. Yep. I closed the folder and exhaled. Oh, they're gonna regret this. Step 1. Replace Harrison Recovery Services. The HOA had no idea that their own towing contract allowed them to switch companies with 48 hours notice. I made sure they did. By planting leaked, financial discrepancies in the HOA's internal reports. I made them believe Harrison Recovery had been overcharging them too. Rick panicked. 2 days later, at an emergency HOA board meeting, the treasurer nervously read out the new contract proposal. This new company offers lower rates and better terms, he stammered. We'd save a lot of money. Rick glared at them. This is a bad idea. But the board outvoted him. And just like that, they unknowingly handed over their towing rights to me. The very next morning, I parked my truck in the exact same spot as before. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, Rick and his cronies arrived, clipboards in hand. Bingo, Rick muttered. Call the new towing company. One of his lackeys dialed the number, completely unaware that the call was going straight to my own company. Minutes later, a tow truck rumbled down the street. Same driver. Same rig. Rick marched over, arms crossed. This truck is in violation. Get it out of here. The driver hesitated, looking at me. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. Play along. The hook latched onto my truck. Again. Rick smirked. I let him believe he was winning. For now. That evening, I drove to the towing yard. This time, the impound lot was full, and not just with resident vehicles. Rick's car. The HOA treasurer's car. 2 more board members' cars. They had no idea that, in their eagerness to tow my truck, they had also broken their own HOA rules. The next morning, the HOA board was in full panic mode. Rick stormed into the towing office, red-faced with fury. What the hell is going on? Why is my car here? The receptionist remained calm. Your vehicle was towed for violating HOA regulations. Rick's eye twitched. You're kidding me. No, sir, she replied. Your fine is $500. Rick clenched his jaw. I am the HOA president. You can't tow my car. The receptionist smiled. Sir, you approved these rules. Rick turned an even darker shade of red. And then, right on cue, I walked in. His eyes snapped to me. His face drained of color. You, he growled. I smirked. Morning, Rick. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The HOA had officially lost. Rick Harrison stormed into the HOA headquarters the next morning, his face red with frustration. His hands trembled as he slammed a stack of papers onto the conference room table. Who authorized this? He bellowed. The other board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Janet Bowers, the HOA treasurer, cleared her throat. Technically, you did, Rick. What? She pushed a folder toward him. Inside were his own signatures approving the updated towing policies. The same ones that had just backfired on him. Rick's jaw clenched. He had been so focused on targeting me that he didn't even realize he'd been playing himself. I walked in at that exact moment, a satisfied smirk tugging at my lips. Morning, folks. Rick snapped his gaze toward me. You son of a... Language, I cut in smoothly. You wouldn't want to violate any HOA conduct codes, would you? Janet hid a smirk behind her hand. I stepped forward and placed a thick manila envelope on the table. Inside this folder, you'll find all the documentation proving that your towing contracts, your bogus fines, and even your little kickback system were all illegal. Rick's face went pale. Janet picked up the envelope and flipped through the documents. Her eyes widened. Rick, this is bad. Don't you dare. Bad enough, I interrupted, that if I wanted to, I could have you arrested by the end of the day. Rick's hands curled into fists. You wouldn't. I smiled. I don't need to. I turned toward Janet and the rest of the board. Because if they're smart, they'll make a choice. I let the words settle. One by one, the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They weren't loyal to Rick. They were loyal to their own self-preservation. Finally, Janet let out a slow breath. Rick, I think it's time you step down. Rick's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the room. No one would meet his gaze. He had lost. News of Rick's removal spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Without him, the HOA's grip loosened almost immediately. Residents who had been harassed for years came forward with their own horror stories. One homeowner had been fined for having the wrong shade of beige paint. Another had been forced to tear down a backyard playset because it was too colorful. An elderly veteran had his wheelchair ramp removed because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. The town council caught wind of the scandal, and an official investigation was launched. By the time the dust settled, the HOA had been completely dismantled, and all previously issued fines were voided. Westwood Estates was finally free. I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching as kids rode their bikes down the street, something they hadn't been allowed to do before. The neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Happier. Rick? He packed up and left town, disgraced and broke. Janet and a few of the board members actually stayed. Without Rick breathing down their necks, they were surprisingly decent people. As for me, I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunrise. One HOA, one mistake, and the entire empire crumbled.